Hello everyone and welcome to today's EAUC webinar. This webinar is about public bodies climate change reporting and it will last approximately 2 hours. Thank you for registering and thanks also to our speakers Jennifer Kaczmarski from the Sustainable Scotland Network and also Clare Wharmby, who is working with the Sustainable Scotland Network to support public bodies climate change reporting. My name is Rebecca Petford and I am the Scotland Programme Coordinator here at the EAUC. If you have any specific event, webinar or training requests, I'll be happy to talk to you at any time. Just a little bit of housekeeping to go over now. I'm hoping that everyone can hear me well. I've muted you all to avoid background noise and you'll continue to be muted throughout the webinar. If you're having any technical issues at all throughout the webinar, please let me know either by posting in the on-screen chat box to the right or sending me an email to rpetford@eauc.org.uk, which you can see on the bottom of your screens now. You will have the opportunity to ask questions throughout the webinar and at the end by typing into the chat box. If you could send all questions to me as EAUC the host, then I will make sure Claire knows to address them. This webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded as a resource with the presentation tomorrow. Please feel free to share these resources with any colleagues or fellow EAUC members. Once the webinar has finished, you'll be sent a short survey for us to gain your feedback. Please take a few minutes to complete this survey as the results will help us to improve our events. That's all from me for now. Thank you again for registering and I will now pass you over to Jennifer.
Thank you EAUC for organising this for us. We have a mixture of universities and further education institutions on the line and also some local authorities that we have invited to this session. So welcome one and all. This is a repeat of a workshop that we ran this morning. This webinar was to host and to introduce you to the climate change reporting team. That's me, Jennifer Kaczmarski, my colleague Rebecca Beavers and Jen Cassell. Our email addresses will feature later on and if you have any questions to do with climate change reporting or the template, then please get in contact with us at any time. Most of you will have heard of SSN, but if you haven't come in contact with us in the past, we're a network funded by the Scottish Government to support the public sector with climate change action reporting. We're a team based in Stirling who are all happy to help with anything to do with reporting or climate change. We also have had support from Resource Efficient Scotland. They're not here at the moment, but any questions on res support or tools can be directed to us and we can pass them on to RES. We're also very grateful to have the support of Clare Wharmby, who assisted SSN in creating the reporting template. We'll pass over to Clare very shortly, and she will be hosting the rest of this session. So the reporting template and the guidance notes and some questions, some frequently asked questions that have been submitted to SSN are all available on the SSN website. The reporting template should be submitted to SSN by the 30th of November. We're hoping that this session will be a good opportunity for you to ask all of your questions, but if they're not answered today or your question is not answered by the guidance notes or the frequently asked questions, then please email one of us as part of the team and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. The major message to take away from today is really to say to not panic. We know this is a new template for all public bodies and we know that you may not have all the data that you need to complete it. You may not have all projects and resources in place yet. That's absolutely fine and it's no problem to submit a report that has gaps in it or that is missing information. An incomplete report is better than no report. There's also a commentary box, or commentary boxes through the majority of the report. And so if you can't get data or you don't have projects or you've got further information that you'd like to give to explain any of the data that you've provided, then please put it in there. It's good background context for us, and we'll use these comments next year when we're developing the template and guidance notes. So any information in those comments box is very welcome. So this webinar will be focusing on section 3 of the reporting template, so corporate emissions, targets and project data. Claire will be running through the sections of the template and then stopping to ask questions at various points. As Rebecca explained, you can you can put your questions through the chat box directly to Rebecca, who will pass them on to Claire. I will now pass you over to Claire, who will start the webinar. But if there's any other questions for SSM support, then Claire will pass them on to us. Thank you.
Right, welcome to the webinar. This is just a quick slide to show you who the team members are. You can see everyone there apart from Jen Cassels, who refuses to give me a photo at the moment. If you want to get in contact with people, as we said, please do email comments and questions afterwards. But if you have questions during the webinar, if you can send them to EAUC host using the chat box, and Rebecca will notify me that we've got questions. There's going to be quite obvious points where we can ask questions as we go through. Right, the objectives of section 3 of the reporting. When we developed the template, what we're looking for is, first of all, to kind of improve the quality and resolution of corporate emissions and the project data from the public sector. The state that we're in at the moment is that it's actually very difficult for anyone to have a look at the public sector as a whole and say, right, these are the emissions that are created by that sector. So part of the objective of this is just to get better data. We're also looking to have a consistent framework for reporting. So at the moment, different sectors report in different ways, and which makes it very difficult to compare and analyse data. So we are looking to improve the analysis by having a consistent template. And we're also hoping that by asking the questions that we've asked in the way that we've asked, it will help organisations focus on the key issues for reporting. However, it's not expected that 100% of organisations will have 100% of data. We are well aware that the public sector has got a complex and difficult estate to manage, and that it's often difficult to get data for various things, that data comes in late, that sources are tricky to get hold of. So don't worry if you feel that you don't have 100% of the data. We don't expect organisations to have that. We don't expect you to achieve absolute accuracy. It's impossible to do, and we understand that there might be estimated data, there might be approximations within there. As long as you can document these and tell us what they are, that's absolutely fine. We also can't guarantee there'll be no changes in the future, but we'd hope that this template, or the format of the template in terms of the questions that we're asking, will hold for at least the next 5 years so that organisations can get used to it. It might be that around about 2020 that we look at this again and say, right, actually we need to ask some slightly different questions or an increased range of questions, but at the moment we're hoping to keep this constant so that people can get used to it. If you're looking for information, if you haven't already found the template or the guidance, the place you need to go and look at is the Sustainable Scotland Network website. The guidance is there, downloadable. The reporting template can be found there. And there's also a section underneath, I think, the support and resources, which has got frequently asked questions. So do use the SSN website as your point of call. In terms of carbon footprinting tools, really this is just a kind of brief note to say that whilst we're aware that a lot of organisations are using different tools, in particular the ones that we're aware of are the Resource Efficient Scotland Carbon Footprint and Project Register tool, which is now available for 2014-15. There is the CSP Our Tool, which was an original Carbon Trust tool that was used in carbon management plans. Some organisations are using sector-specific tools, and quite a few organisations have their own developed spreadsheets. The Carbon Footprint and Project Register tool, which is Resource Efficient Scotland's freely available tool, is if you are if you're running your own system and it's working for you and you're confident in the data, you don't need to change your system. But if you haven't yet started to calculate your carbon footprint, or you feel that your system isn't fit for purpose, the CSP Our Tool is a good option, and it basically looks like this when you go in. This is available on the Resource Efficient Scotland website, and it's free to download. There's two versions, a small version and a large version. You probably would want the small version if you haven't started, because you don't need as many data entry options as the larger version. This tool has reliable emission factors for you. You only need to put your data entry in and it will produce a carbon footprint. All your data requirements pretty much are in one place. And I'll be using this tool as an example within the workshop of how to enter your data. If you would like to use this tool and you're not already, but you would like some more guidance around how to use it, there is a downloadable, I think there's a webinar available about how to use the tool. There's guidance on the RES website, and if you get in touch with Resource Efficient Scotland, they should also be able to point you towards support for that. One of the things that I wanted to talk about up front before we kind of got into the nuts and bolts of the actual reporting template is that for the academic sector, there is a slight issue around emission factors and years. We had quite a long talk about this in the session this morning, and really it comes about because of the way that the Department of Energy and Climate Change, so DEC, do the carbon accounting. The problem that occurs is that if you are running a calendar year for your footprinting, it's fairly straightforward. All your months would fall within 2014, and you would use the 2014 factor. Most organisations in the public sector run on a financial or tax year basis, which would be April to March. And in that case, for 2014-15, most of the months fall within 2014, so 9 out of the 12 months are in the 2014 year, and therefore DEC say use your 2014 factors. However, if you run an academic year, which is either July to June or August to July, you have either 6 months in each year, or you've got 5 months and 7 months, and either way, they recommend that you use the 2015 factors. So we actually have the situation in Scotland in the public sector that some organisations, if we ask for a reporting year of 2014-15, some organisations will be using the 2014 factors and some will be using the 2015 factors. What happens, the reason why this is a problem is that at the moment, we didn't kind of foresee this in time when we developed the template for the the template for the pilot year, and therefore what we've got in there at the moment is the 2014 factors only. Therefore, even if you've used 2015 factors to calculate your footprint, when you go into the template and you put in your data in question 3B, which is split down by emission sources, it will force you to use the 2014 factors. So this issue, we are aware that it exists. It's only going to be an issue this year, because next year we will find a fix for this so that there's the 2 years options in there. But what I will do is when we get to this bit of the template, I will explain to people how they can deal with this and what comments and explanation they need to give so that we make sure that we can reconcile the data correctly later on. So, going on back to the template now, that we've kind of covered that issue. Section 3 of the template, we've kind of split it into 4 key parts. Part A is the current and previous carbon footprints. So this covers questions 3A, 3B and 3C. We then look a bit about targets, which is question 3D. We're then going to look at carbon reductions from projects, which is questions 3E, 3F, 3H and 3J. And finally, we'll look at carbon increases and decreases from other sources. And this is questions 3G and 3I. So it's not an exact route through the template, but we've tried to divide it into sections that make sense with each other. So starting off with question 3A, this asks for your corporate emissions from the start of the baseline year to the end of the reporting year. Key points here are, first of all, that the baseline year is specific to your organisation. We can't set an exact baseline year for all organisations because people started the journey at a different point. We have organisations that can go back to 2005-06 with a fair amount of accuracy. We've got a lot of organisations at the moment who are saying, actually, we've finished our last target period and we're looking to re-baseline. So it's likely that in this year and the next year we will have quite a few organisations with very recent baseline years and quite a few ones with slightly older baseline years. It's up to your organisation, and if you don't know what your baseline year is or you can't provide the data with any accuracy, then you should be looking at resetting that ideally. The year type is for reference, so it's just to let us know whether you're using a financial tax year basis or an academic year or a calendar year. And the scopes 1 to 3 are approximate. We don't need people to get this exactly right, but it will be useful if you can split things up roughly into scopes, and I'll explain the different scopes in a second. The comments in this are also important. So what we'd like people to do is just to make sure that they can kind of detail what it is that they're telling us. So say, for example, we've got a year here. The comments here explain that this is a baseline year for the current carbon management plan. It says that grid electricity is based on old DEC factors. It's not split into scopes 2 and 3. Waste is calculated with the carbon metric, which is a different way of calculating waste emissions, and there was no water data available. So these are just kind of the notes that explain, for this particular year, what kind of boundary conditions and what kind of methodology did you use to calculate your emissions. So we want to talk just very quickly about scopes so that we get things in the right place, and then I'll take people through a typical boundary and a diagram to go with that. The scopes that we're talking about, these come from the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which splits all the kinds of emissions from organisations into scopes. So scope 1 is direct emissions from estates and vehicles. So this is fuel use in buildings, which might be natural gas or fuel oil. Fuel use in fleet, so diesel and petrol from your own fleet. And fugitive emissions, for example, refrigerants that might come from your own estate. Scope 2 is the generation of grid electricity or the generation of purchased heat and steam. So really, scope 2 is indirect emissions. They're not emissions that are actually occurring from your site directly, but you are responsible for those emissions because of the amount of the fuel that you're consuming. Scope 3 are also indirect emissions, but these are a slightly more tenuous link in terms of how you account for them. Within Scope 3, we include things like water use, waste recycling, transmission and distribution losses, so that's part of the electricity grid, which is why electricity falls in both Scope 2 and Scope 3, and business travel and commuting. So these are the kind of like the approximate scopes that we should be using for different things. There are always carbon accounting subtleties within these, depending on whether it might be that you have, I don't know, purchased heat and steam that you actually buy from a supplier on your own estate. There's all sorts of different ways that this is done. Basically, you want to get this approximately right, but it doesn't have to be absolute. Again, if you're unsure about where things should go or if you've got them in the correct scopes, make sure you clarify in the comments what you've done. So that's the scopes. It's also very important in terms of this section is to draw a boundary and to make sure that you're confident about where your boundary is. So we've colour-coded this according to the different scopes. So scope 1 is red, scope 2 is green, and scope 3 is blue. Not quite sure why, except I like the colours. Oops, is that going to? Yep. So this dotted line represents the carbon footprint boundary. And this is an imaginary organisation, probably a college or a university. So the first thing is that we've got estates. So we've got 8 campus buildings and 1 accommodation block. And within those buildings, we've got direct fuel use, so natural gas and gas oil. We've got grid electricity generation. Sorry. We've got grid electricity transmission distribution. And we've got waste, recycling, landfill and compost, which are also scope 3. And water supply and treatment, scope 3. So those are all emission sources that belong to different bits of the estate. In addition to our 8 campus buildings, we might also pay some bills at a different site. So in this case of this organisation, they use the buildings at a shared hospital site, and because they have those buildings and use those buildings, they pay 10% of the bills. So in this case, what the organisation has done is said, right, we are going to include that within our carbon footprint boundary, and therefore this 10% of natural gas, grid electricity, generation, transmission, distribution are going to be included in our footprint. If that is the case for your organisation, that you actually pay the bill somewhere else for a service, you will need to talk to that organisation and discuss who puts it in whose boundary. It doesn't matter if it gets double counted. It does matter if it doesn't get counted at all, but really this is a communication issue. Ideally, you don't both put it in your boundary, but it's better to double count than not count at all. Also within our carbon footprint boundary, we've got fleet, so we've got diesel and petrol fleet fuel use, and we've got staff business travel. So we've got private car, rail and air travel. Now, as important as kind of setting your boundary in terms of what's in, you also need to think about the exclusions to your boundary. So in this case, this organisation said, well, we've got an overseas recruitment office where there's energy, waste and water, but it's a very small, it's a desk in a shared office. We pay a standard charge. We don't get any bills. We don't know what the consumption is. You don't really, if you can help it, want to be introducing electricity from overseas because it makes the factor very, very difficult to calculate. So this has been excluded for being both small and impossible to get the data. This organisation has also said, well, consumption of goods, materials and services, this is not likely to be small, but on the other hand, it's very, very difficult to calculate. At the moment, there is no straightforward, easy method to calculate this, the carbon value for this, and therefore a lot of organisations have excluded it. Staff and student commuting, again, this organisation has decided that that's out with their control and also they don't have sufficient data. Refrigerants, although it's a Scope 1 emission, they're saying, well, we don't have enough data on this, we don't collect this, it's likely to be, again, a minor source. And staff business travel, within their expenses system, although they can collect car, rail and air travel expenses, they can't separate out taxis and buses, and so that's been excluded. So what this diagram does is it starts to build up a picture of what you've got in and what you've got out. And it's very important for the organisations to make sure that they can kind of work out what's in and what's out, and that they can communicate that to people. So this is a useful way of making sure that you're comfortable about what it is you're reporting, and to be reporting the same thing year on year for comparability. Going on from that, the kinds of things that go wrong with historic data, people get quite often what's called boundary creep. So as data availability improves, then you end up with more emissions within your boundary. So for example, it might be that the expenses, the finance team said one year, well, we can't get you taxi data, and then the next year say, well, actually, we can get you taxi data now. If your boundary has been set with excluding taxi data for the period of time of your target, then you should keep taxi data out. You might want to collect it and log it somewhere, but you don't want to put it in your boundary for reporting purposes, because all that means is that your boundary keeps creeping up. The only exception to that is if you can go back and re-baseline. But ideally, you want to set a boundary for a set amount of time, which is your target period. We also get leaping boundaries. So particularly colleges and universities tend to merge or divest at various points, and this causes problems as well, so that it's very difficult to merge two data sets generally. We think going forward that the more we kind of encourage people to do this and to manage their boundaries correctly and to keep their data in a good format and state, that this will become easier. But at the moment, if that has been the case for you, that you've merged with another organisation, it might be worth setting a more recent baseline year that you can kind of saying, right, let's start again from scratch here. A lot of organisations also suffer because they have a lack of documentation around their data sources, what their data actually represents, and what the methodology was for calculating it. quite a lot of people will come into an organisation and be passed a spreadsheet that has 5 or 6 carbon values on for the previous years with no way of working out what that carbon value actually is based on in terms of the data behind it. This is a real problem for organisations. The first thing is don't do this to someone else, so make sure that you have good documentation and that you keep a record of what actually goes into your carbon footprint. But again, if you cannot, with any security, put this data in and know where it comes from, it might be time to re-baseline and to move your baseline up to a more recent year where you can have more accurate data. The final thing here, the Department of Energy and Climate Change changed their methodology from time to time around things. So recently, well, not actually that recently now, 3 years ago, they changed from doing a 5-year rolling grid average to a 1-year average. They changed the air travel by putting radiative forcing in, and they've just recently changed the municipal waste factor quite considerably. There's not much we can do about this, but really a lot of this is about making sure that you've got good data management in place, and that means that you keep your actual consumption data and apply emission factors when you're required to do that, so that if the emission factors change and you want to change them retrospectively, you're able to do that. So really the kind of key for this is to make sure that you keep actual consumption data, you're very clear about your boundary, and you're very clear about your methodology. So that's question 3A. Question 3B asks for a breakdown of emission sources for the most recent year. What we want people to do in this question is to provide a level of breakdown that makes sense to your organisation. We don't need to have it as detailed as you might keep it in your own spreadsheet. So for example, if you have your energy data per building, we don't need to see electricity per building, gas per building, etc. We'd rather see a total for electricity and gas. If, however, you think there's a sensible breakdown of your electricity that would help us, for example, accommodation, campus, etc., do feel free to kind of you can use the same factor several times and just give us the value for that particular one, and note in the comments what this reflects or refers to. You'll also see in the template that there are 2 factors for electricity. There's a grid electricity generation and a grid electricity transmission and distribution. So those are the 2 parts of the electricity factor: the generation, which is a scope 2 emission, and the transmission distribution, which is scope 3. So having the 2 factors in there allows you to break your electricity down correctly. So therefore, for each kind of lump of electricity consumption, you actually need to put it in twice. Once as generation and once as transmission distribution. We think we've managed to put most of the factors that people would be commonly used in there, but there's obviously going to be some that we've missed. If you can't find an appropriate factor, please use one of the other options, which is down at the bottom of the list, and detail in the comments what that represents. We would rather that you didn't go into the background, into lists within the template and change the factors there, because it's going to make the analysis very tricky for us. So if you can't find the factor you need, just use the other, provide some detail, and we'll make sure that that factor is included for future years. Any further information you think would be useful as an explanation, please provide in the comments. So for example, in this one here, we've got business travel by car. It's a scope 3 emission. It's 2,782 tonnes of CO2 equivalent. It's been calculated, and this is, the comments say it's based on mileage for average diesel car. We've got no information held about fuel types and sizes, and this only represents data collected through the expenses system. So this is basically saying that whilst we are aware that there might be car travel outside the expenses system, it's only collating what's actually in there. So it's again defining your boundary slightly. We've also spoken this morning quite a lot about the narrative that goes behind changes to emission sources. And if in questions 3B or 3A you want to explain that emissions have gone up from, in 3A, between years from student numbers, or that you want to explain in question 3B what the grid electricity covers in terms of your campus, please make sure that you put as much detail as you think is useful in the comments. We don't need reams and reams of detail, but it's useful to, if you think there's something that needs to be clarified, the comments box is a place to do that. The final question in this section is the generation, consumption, export of renewable energy in question 3C. It's totally acceptable to use estimated figures. We understand that a lot of organisations won't be separately metering these, so document in the comments if it's an estimated figure. Make sure you check the units. We've had a couple of people coming back and forgetting that it's in kilowatt hours, not megawatt hours, so make sure you've got the right units. And if you've got biomass fuel consumption, you should be recording the biomass usage in question 3B. So there's an option to say biomass and tonnes, I think it's in tonnes, and it will give you the emissions for that fuel source, whilst the heat and the power generation, which is obviously renewable, comes into 3C. So you can report it, it comes into both questions. So an example of how you complete this table, this organisation's got a wind turbine, which it generates 200,000 kilowatt hours, all of which is exported. And it's also got a solar thermal array. It's estimating the generation from that because it's not metered. It thinks it generates about 100,000 and it uses them all on site. So this is just what we're trying to find out from this question is what renewables people have and what they're doing with the output of those. Now, we spoke earlier on in the webinar about what happens if you've got emission factors if you're using 2015 and the template is telling you to use 2014. What we would like you to do in this case, if you are using 2015 factors to calculate your footprint, please put the correct value as you have calculated it in question 3A. This will, and note in the comments that this is calculated using 2015 emission factors as the college is using an academic year basis. That's absolutely fine. In question 3B, where it's asking you to put your consumption units in and it's generating your carbon footprint for you, explain in the total at the bottom that the total does not match with question 3A as you're using a different year of EF for calculation. What this will do is it will signal to the team at SSN that when we go to the analysis that we'll need to reconcile, we'll need to apply the correct factors to your emissions in question 3B. So this is just to, if this is the case for you, that you are using 2015 factors for your footprint because it's academic year and that's how you've done it, this is how to reconcile it. Right, that's the first part of the reporting template. So Rebecca is now going to take questions if you'd like to send them to the EAUC host, and we'll see if we've got any questions from this part. Don't feel shy about asking questions. Or we just stunned you all into silence. If any of you are using the Resource Efficient Scotland CF and PR tool, you will have noticed that at the moment it uses for 2014-15, it applies to 2014 factors. If, however, you're an academic organisation and you're running an academic year and you'd like to apply 2015 factors, please contact Stephen Turnbull at RES, and he will be able to supply you with a version that has the correct factors for 2015 in it. We don't want to put it on the website because I think there's a risk that people will download it in confusion and get very muddled up. But if you do require this, if you've identified that this is what you'd like to do and you do require this tool, then please do contact Stephen to ask for it.
So we have had one question, which is from Bruce Lang. And it's just asking, can you just clarify that 3A uses 2015 factors and 3B will use 2014 factors?
So for organisations that, for most organisations in the public sector, this is not going to be an issue. They will use 2014 to calculate their they will use the 2014 factors to calculate their footprint, and therefore the factors in question 3B are correct. So it's only if you are an academic organisation who has identified that they run an academic year and that they are applying DEC and DEFRA factors as per the rules, and they have already said, right, we're using, because most of our months or 6 of our months fall in 2015, we're using 2015 factors. they are the only organisations that need to worry about that. If this is all you're kind of thinking this doesn't apply to us because we run a financial year, a financial tax year, that's absolutely fine. Don't worry about it. It's not going to be your problem. It's only organisations that run an academic year and know that they've already basically chosen 2015 factors. Does that answer your question? Are there any other questions, Rebecca?
So we've got no other questions just now, but if anybody thinks of them while Claire is talking, you can always post them in the box, and then I'll bring them up at the next question session.
Brilliant, in which case we will move on to section 3D. Sorry, it's not 3D, we'll move on to the target, to looking at targets. So this is question 3D around organisational targets. It's just the one question around targets, so it's fairly straightforward, this bit. The reason why we asked this question was really to try and find out the kind of range of targets that public sector organisations had that related to climate change and carbon emissions. So we're interested in not only the kind of your straightforward carbon reduction targets, but also any targets you've got around business travel or water or waste or any other emission sources that you think will have an impact on the way that you perform. We know that some organisations are only going to have an overall carbon reduction target. That's absolutely fine. We also know that some organisations don't have any overall target, but they have reduction targets for different emission sources or parts of the organisation. That's also fine. Some organisations might have no targets at all. If that is the case for you, it might be that your target period has run out and you have not yet set a target with your senior management team, or it might be that you've never had targets before but you are thinking about doing them in the future. Whatever the reason is for this, you'll need to make sure that this is explained in the governance section and that you've got a plan for either how you're going to get targets in the future or why you don't think targets are going to work for you. Make sure as well that your targets are expressed properly. So we've got sort of various examples of kind of targets that we might have here. This one the first one is carbon management plan reduction target. So 2% annual reduction up to 2020 based on the 2011-12 baseline year. This is a reasonably well expressed target. It should really say 1920 rather than 2020 because it's not entirely clear exactly when it ends. And this would be based, you'd also need to clarify at some point, this would be based on the boundary, your carbon management boundary. You might also have a business travel target, which might be expressed in costs. So it might be about reducing the business travel costs, but it also could have an impact on your carbon emissions. You might have a target around water use to reduce water use over the next 5 years. You might have a target that's based on your power usage effectiveness in data centres. And you might have a target around new build and refurbishment. These are the kind of examples of targets that you might find within your organisation that you want to document here. One of the other reasons why, just to go back to that, just be aware that sometimes the boundary of those targets is not exactly the carbon management plan boundary. So sometimes you're talking about a target that is based on a different boundary that you're using for your emission scopes. You just need to note that and say, you know, the business travel, for example, might be based on absolutely all business travel, but we only cover a certain amount of business travel within the carbon management plan. One of the reasons why we want organisations to have this information in front of them is that it's sometimes what happens is that organisations have target proliferation and they just end up with hundreds and hundreds of targets that are not actually really doing very much. If nobody is tracking them, interested in whether you're achieving them or not, and putting any resources into achieving them, then they're probably not actually particularly useful to you, and it might be time to kind of retire them. So part of this is a kind of, you know, let's have a look at all the things we've got here. Do the targets need to be refreshed? Do they need to be updated? Do they need to be got rid of? Other issues with targets, and we had quite a long discussion about this morning, is that one of the mistakes that we have been making in the past is that our our targets have been a little bit too simplistic sometimes. In particular, if you have a carbon management target, so you're trying to reduce your carbon emissions, bear in mind that you are potentially exposing yourself to quite a lot of risk in terms of how the relationship between consumption and carbon. So for example, you might find that one year you've reduced your consumption in terms of kilowatt hours, so you've done your job in terms of what you're meant to be doing, which is to reduce your resource use, but the carbon intensity has actually gone up, and so your carbon emissions have gone up. So therefore, you look like you've lost when actually you've won. The same can be true vice versa. You can actually have that your consumption units have gone up and your cost has gone up, but your carbon's come down because the emission factors come down. So what we're really trying to say here is that if you're setting targets in the future, is to make sure that you've got metrics that you can kind of put alongside those targets and explain at what point have you won, at what point have you achieved your target, and how can you demonstrate that you've achieved it, and make sure that there's kind of no wriggle room within those. So understand the variance of your data set. You know, if your carbon footprint naturally fluctuates by quite a lot, be wary of setting small annual reduction targets because it will be very difficult to see whether you've achieved them or not. Make sure that you set conditions around targets so that if your target is based on you having a certain level of funding, if that funding doesn't appear, then your ability to meet the target is severely compromised, and you need to say that. So the conditions up front are a certain level of funding. And it's also worth thinking about making regular updates to senior management, that it's better to have 1 or 2 targets that you report on regularly than 7 or 8 targets that nobody ever reports on. So actually, in terms of kind of doing what you want to do, you want targets that actually push in the direction you want to go in and that are measurable and reportable, and you know, that actually do what you want them to do. And ideally, you want to make sure that at least you know before the end of the year whether you'd like to meet the targets or not. So again, it's having good data management systems for those. Right, so that's all we're going to do with the targets section. Does anyone have any questions about targets or indeed about the earlier section, now that you have time to think and draw your breath?
I've not got any questions written yet.
We couldn't keep people quiet this morning.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yep.
Hi, it's Kate Fitzpatrick from SRUC. Rebecca, I did type something in, but I don't know if you got it or not.
Hi, it's not coming, so since you're now able to speak loud, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, please. Claire, I just don't really understand the difference between the renewables, say, for example, with biomass and 3B and C. I've just got the tool open, and I just don't, because I've just selected biomass, and it's a kilowatt hour. Say on a site, we have a biomass boiler. Where do I put that as 3B or 3C, or do I put it in both? Or?
Right. The reason why this is a bit weird is that most renewables, they don't produce emissions, but biomass, because you're actually burning it, does produce a small amount of emissions. So the input to your biomass, which is your tons of biomass fuel going in, that needs to go into section 3B. But the outputs of your biomass, which will be heat or power, need to go into 3C.
Okay, so when I select biomass in 3B, it comes up with units kilowatt hours, not tons.
Okay, so you need to convert from your tons to kilowatt hours.
Okay, so that's fine.
If you look online, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So
you mentioned tons earlier.
Yeah, sorry, kilowatt hours is a bit of a stupid unit for biomass, to be honest, because nobody buys kilowatt hours of biomass. They buy it in tons. But in future, what we will have, again, is we'll have much more flexibility about the units that people can put the data into. It's just that in this template, we're a bit limited about what people can do. But you're right, I think it's kilowatt hours, and I can't remember off the top of my head what the conversion factor is, but
No, it's okay.
it should be findable. Perfect.
So basically,
brilliant.
What then I would put in 3B goes into 3C and total generated, and then whatever you consume of that goes in. So that's
yeah.
okay. Cool.
Yeah.
That's all. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Brilliant.
Okay, so apparently Queen Margaret University do buy biomass in kilowatt hours, so there you go.
I mean, in some ways it does make sense, doesn't it? Because you'd want to, rather than buy tons, you'd want to buy a certain amount of energy, because presumably it's kind of like that sets then the kind of the moisture content and things. But I've always seen it, whenever I've seen it purchased, it's purchased in tons. So it's interesting that you're getting it in kilowatt hours. As I said, next year what we'll try and do is work out all of these kind of little tweaks that would help people and make sure that there's kind of like there's more options. So for example, that we'll have fuels where you could buy them in litres, either as litres or kilowatt hours or whatever, because DEC and DEFRA have actually a huge range of options in terms of the units that you can use for consumption.
Great, so I've received no more questions.
Right, in which case we'll move on. Okay, so now we're on to part C. I'm not quite sure how we're doing in terms of time. Not too bad, I don't think. Right, so this part looks at the carbon reductions from projects. So questions 3E, 3F, and 3H, and 3J. The first question, which is 3E, asks for the estimated total annual carbon savings from all projects implemented by the organisation in the report year. So this is, and it asks you to split them roughly by emission source. So you have to put them against electricity, or I think it's heating, fuels, and water and waste, etc. The reason why we're interested in this is that we want to know where organisations are attacking their footprint, roughly. We've done some work on this already, and we're kind of interested to see that there's kind of, I guess there's a discrepancy between where emissions are coming from and where people are focusing projects. And there might be perfectly good reasons around that, but we're interested to see if that is reflective of the sector as a whole. So the focus is on the estimated annual savings. We understand that most people don't have, well, certainly nobody has for every single project a really accurate method to kind of check they're getting the emissions. So we know that these are going to be estimated annual savings. And these are projects that you have implemented in the reporting year. So anything that was implemented in your reporting year 2014-15 is what you want to put in here. The savings are against emission sources, as I said, and if you've got a project where the implementation phase is running over more than one reporting period, you want to count it in the year it's complete. So for example, if you started a CHP project in June 2013 and didn't finish it until June 2014, the implementation year should be 2014-15. And it should be reported in questions 3E and 3F. If you've got any uncertainties, if you think that you might be overestimating the savings you'll get or underestimating the savings that you'll get from these projects, then please clarify those in the comments box. No one is going to hold you to these and kind of come in and say, well, we want to do an audit of all of these. But if you feel that there's uncertainty around particular projects, do note that down. We'd be interested. We also, if you feel that you don't have uncertainty in that you've done some very good monitoring of it, then we'd also be interested to find that out. We had a lot of discussion in the session this morning about how people chased up the savings they're actually getting and how you reconcile estimated savings versus actual savings and things like that. And the short answer is it's not easy, I think. Question 3F looks at the top 10 carbon reduction projects implemented by the organisation in the report year. So question 3E is all of your projects that you implemented, and then question 3F is a bit more detail about 10 of your top projects. Again, estimated annual savings that projects were implemented in the reporting year. If you haven't completed 10 projects, then just include all the ones that you've done. So if you've done 5 projects, list 5 projects. Obviously then, the total savings that you put in 3F probably should add up to the total savings in 3E. So just so it's a good double check for yourself. If you've done more than 10 projects, then choose your top 10. We're not again, kind of like saying it's got to be based on X, Y, and Z. You might say, well, these are the top 10 based on savings or their best payback, or this is a small project, but it was a pilot project and it had really innovative elements, and we were interested in what the outcomes were. What we're trying to get from this is, if every organisation can send back, you know, their top 10 or their top 5 projects that they've done, then all of a sudden, across the public sector, we've got 150 organisations with 10 projects. We've got a bank of 1,500 projects that allows us to start going and saying, right, okay, who's doing what kind of projects, who's doing them successfully, who can help whom, what kind of ideas are there, if there's organisations doing stuff that other organisations aren't, you know, how can we make sure that that knowledge and information kind of travels across. So this is really, you know, this is a chance for you to tell us all of the good things that you're doing in the organisation. The next, well, 3H is anticipated annual carbon savings from all the projects implemented by the organisation in the year ahead. So this is what you think you're going to implement in this year. So this year, and when it says a year ahead, it's slightly confusing because essentially we are already in the year ahead. But this is a year ahead from the point of view of the report. So the year ahead is 2015-16. So we're already, you know, between 30 and 50% through 2015-16, so you'll have a reasonably good idea of some of those projects already. You'll also have projects that will obviously happen in the second half of the year, but you should probably have, at this point, a reasonably good idea of what those projects might be. If you're very uncertain about the annual savings, or if a project will even go ahead, again, just document in the comments. This is, you know, based on project X happening, you know, still uncertain, or it might be delayed, or whatever. It's, again, we're not, there's not going to be someone coming and auditing you with a big stick around these. It's just to get some information. The final question in this sort of section is 3J, and this is total carbon reduction savings from the baseline year. So this is a tricky question if you've got a baseline year that's a long way away, or you don't have really, really good carbon reduction project records. So a project that's implemented in year 1 should produce savings each year until the edge of the project lifetime. And therefore, this is a kind of cumulative savings for all of your projects. If you can answer this question, excellent. Again, you know, document in the comments what your uncertainty is. But if you're unable to answer the question, again, just note it in the comments that this is not, you know, that prior to a certain point in time, you don't have any collated carbon reduction project records. You can, if you want, estimate it in some shape or form, but tell us roughly how you've estimated it. Again, this is, as people move forward through the process, we'll get better at being able to answer this question. In fact, we won't need to answer this question because we'll have the details from the earlier questions. One of the things that we kind of did in the session earlier was we talked about kind of examples of how to carbon cost projects. This is where the Resource Efficient Scotland carbon reduction and carbon footprint and project register tool would be really helpful to you. Within that tool, there is a project register, and what it does is it allows you to put in projects in particular locations or across your estate, and says, okay, this is the emission, this is the year that they're implemented, and then this is the amount of savings that I'm going to get for a certain type of emission saving. And what what the tool allows you to do is you can then go in, if you run your project register in this tool and you put all your projects in, it's very easy for you to go in and extract your top 10 projects or your, you know, all of your net savings for 2014-15 against grid electricity, etc., just by filtering the rows. So just to give you an example of kind of carbon costing projects, this one looks at an LED lighting replacement. So it looks at replacing 50% of light fittings in building 1. In the tool, we've got building 1 that's got electricity. We've got 6,500,000 kilowatt hours. The aim of the project is to reduce electricity from lighting. We know that LED technology saves approximately 80% from average lights. Again, as you knew more about the project, you'll be able to be a lot more accurate about that. We don't know exactly how much probably we use as lighting as an end use of electricity, but we can make an estimate using UK data for offices, which says around about 30% of electricity probably goes on lighting. This will then give us an approximate saving, an annual saving. So the total energy use of the building times by 50% for the number of light fittings, times by 80% for the technology improvement, and times by 30% for the end use lighting, which gives us 780,000 kilowatt hours. We can approximate a project cost based on a payback of around about 3 years by multiplying the savings we're going to get by 3 for the number of years and by 0.1 pounds for the cost of electricity, which is approximate again, giving us around about £230,000 roughly investment to get this. We can then put that data into the CSP Our Tool, and from that we can then get our simple payback, we can get carbon cost effectiveness, we can get carbon savings and cost savings. So this is the kind of thing you can do when you don't have any other data. Obviously, as projects get closer to completion, suppliers will be providing better and better approximations of this. So the more you can give them kind of accurate data around the buildings and accurate data around the light fittings that are changed, they'll be able to provide you with better data around the cost of the project and things like that. So the idea of a project register should be that it's an iterative document that, you know, almost once a month or once every quarter, as a team, you're going in and checking your project register, updating your assumptions around projects, ticking off the projects that have been completed, following up, getting funding for projects or looking for funding the projects that don't have it, assessing different opportunities, adding new opportunities, and all the other things that you should be doing around your project register. Another example of a house carbon cost projects, this is a project for a print review to change settings from password to password print collect function and automatic double-sided printing. So if as an organisation you haven't done this, this is a good project. This, we need to find out first of all what it is in our carbon footprint this is going to save. So this is really looking at the waste recycling element of it. And at the moment, the data for that building says we've got, well, across the organisation, my imaginary organisation's got 112 tonnes of recycling waste every year. This project, well, what's it going to do? First of all, it's going to reduce paper use and print consumables. It's going to save electricity on printing, and it's also going to reduce waste at source. So in actual fact, it's doing an awful lot more than we're kind of giving it credit for in the carbon footprint. But at the moment, we're just calculating its impact on our recycling tonnage. So we can estimate the proportion of paper in recycling at 50%. We can estimate this project is going to reduce waste printing by about 50%. So 50% of that paper is going to go. We can give it a cost in terms of the IT requirement and staff awareness. And again, drop the data into the CSP Our Tool and get some payback time. This gives us a payback in 0.5 years. It's quite expensive in terms of carbon cost effectiveness, but it's very effective in terms of cost saving. It's actually a lot more carbon. It's one of those projects that's probably more carbon effective than it looks like because of all the other benefits that you haven't got that are actually included. But nevertheless, this is obviously quite a good project to be doing. Doesn't cost you very much up front. Does enable you to save some carbon and save some money, in quite a considerable amount of money once you included the paper in. So having a range of projects on your project register, from the expensive technological solutions through to the more simple behavioural changes or the policy changes or things like that, enable you, when you've got a climate where it becomes harder to get funding for things, to still find things that can be done. Say, right, okay, we can't do these projects, but we can do these ones. Right, so that brings us to the end of the project section. Do we have any questions around completing the projects section of the template?
We don't have any questions yet.
Is everyone asleep?
If the people that are just listening in have any questions, they can also email them. So I'll keep an eye on my email inbox if any of you have got any questions. Okay, so what happens if they are not all complete this year?
So if we're talking about question, let me go back the way. So going back to, so if we're talking about question 3H, which is the anticipated annual carbon savings from all projects implemented by the organisation in the year ahead. So this year, so in the current year, so 15-16, if they're not complete yet, but you think that they will be complete and implemented by the end of 2015-16, then you need to record them in 3H. But make sure that you put in the comments that there is a certain amount of uncertainty about the emission saving that you're reporting that you think you'll get, because obviously you don't know exactly that all of these projects will happen. If you're talking about projects that are, say for example you've got on your project list that the project was due to be implemented in 2014-15, and you think, well, okay, so, but you know that that project is not yet complete, then your project list is out of date. You should update your project list because the implementation year is clearly not 2014-15 because it's not done yet. So the implementation year becomes 2015-16. If you think that actually realistically you're not going to complete that project until 16-17, again you need to update your list. So the more that your project list should be updated very regularly to say, right, is the implementation date for this project accurate? Are the details around it accurate? And then when it's complete, then you can tick it off as complete. Because what that allows you to do is to go in order to complete this section, it's very straightforward. You go in and you filter for projects implemented in reporting year 2015 that are complete. And that gives you your set of projects that should be going into question 3E and 3F. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that's it.
Do we have any other questions? I'm speeding through this webinar at a rate that is leaving us breathless over here, so because I kind of assumed that we'd spend more time on questions. So, you know, do feel free to ask whatever you want.
There are no other questions just now.
Okay. So we'll move on to the last section, which is talking about increases and decreases in your footprint. Now, the reason why we put these questions in is that one of the things that we've kind of got a lot better at understanding in the last few years is that it's not as straightforward as, you know, you produce a set of projects, carbon reduction projects, you implement them and you make savings and therefore your footprint decreases. We know that there's an awful lot of other things that change people's footprints depending on the type of organisation they are and things that are quite organisationally specific. We did try to capture this in original carbon management plans by saying, well, we'll account for business as usual growth at 0.7% per year. This was probably not the most accurate method of doing it. We didn't really have a better method at that point, but we do now have better methods for doing this. And so this section of the report is trying to enable you to account for the fact that although, you know, you might be saying, well, we've implemented 10,000 tonnes worth of savings, but yet our footprint has gone up by 5,000 tonnes, in which case something else is happening to your footprint. It's not that you're not doing your job, it's that other things are happening that are stopping you from doing that. You're basically running to stand still. And I think a lot of organisations feel that that's what they're doing. The other thing that we spoke about in the session this morning is that the academic sector in particular is unusual in the public sector in that it's aiming for growth. So we kind of want more students and more education, and it's a good thing, so we want to grow universities, but that has a consequent effect on footprints. So if you're increasing your student numbers year on year, it's unrealistic to assume that you're not going to get an increase in your footprint unless you're managing to do an incredibly good job of reducing your emissions per student in line with the increases, but you could still be doing an awful lot of reduction activity for very, very little change in your footprint, which is quite frustrating unless you can explain it. So, question 3G asks for your estimated decrease or increase in emissions from other sources in the reporting year. This question is about other factors that are driving your footprint. For example, so what I've done here is sort of shown your carbon footprint rather than a kind of nice neat box as we kind of drew it earlier. It's actually kind of more like a cloud. And if you imagine that you've got things on the inside that are pushing it outwards or inwards, so you've got things like student numbers, you've got estate changes, you've got research income that might be either pushing your footprint, it might be increasing your footprint, they might be decreasing your footprint. You've also got external factors like the emission factors for electricity are very variable, and you've got other external factors which you really have no control over whatsoever, things like weather, so degree days, for example. So really this is about kind of trying to work out what are all these factors doing to your footprint and what is the net effect of those. They won't be all operating in the same areas and in the same directions. One of the things that we've started to understand about business as usual projections and forecasts is that actually they're incredibly, they're quite complex things. Now this is another area where the carbon footprint and project register tool from RES will help you, in that there's a section within it called future changes, and what it allows you to do is to go into to look at lines of emission sources from a building and say, well, actually we think that that building's we know that we're increasing the floor area next year by 50%, or that we know that we're increasing the operating hours of that building, or that we know we're going to put more students into that building. And you can add, you can increase your footprint by growing different bits of your estate. If we reframe the question here, just to kind of try and make sure everyone understands exactly what it is we're asking. In the reporting year of 2015, if nothing else had changed from the previous year, what would you expect your footprint to have been? Well, most people would say, well, actually, you'd expect it to be whatever your carbon footprint in 2013-14 was, minus your projects implemented in 2013-14, which you're seeing the effect of in 2014-15. So it's basically you're kind of saying, well, if we stripped all of that stuff out, that's what should happen. That's very unlikely to be the actual scenario. So therefore, you have to think, okay, well, what did actually happen? Did our consumption patterns go up? Is that up or down? Is it weather related? Is it because we've got new buildings? Is it we've got fewer staff? Is it because we've got more students? And you can also look at the emission factor for grid electricity. So depending on which factor set you're choosing depends on whether you went up or you went down for those years. It is complicated to do this, and we know that it's one of the things that most people are saying they're finding quite difficult to put. They can say often that they know roughly what it is that's causing their footprint to change, and they know roughly which direction it's going in, but they can't always put a number to it. If that's the case, again, if you can write in the comments that we think, for example, our estate has increased, our floor area has increased by X amount in this year, and that has pushed our footprint up. However, we can't provide a figure for exactly how much. That's absolutely fine. But it is worth thinking about in the future about how you're going to respond to this question, because in actual fact, a lot of this is about you being able to communicate with senior management about what's happening to your footprint, and also to talk to them about what the implications of future decisions are. So that I think that if you've got an accurate, or you've got a more accurate business as usual forecast going forward, it's a lot easier to have discussions about whether you're going to meet targets in the future and what the implications of certain things are. So for example, if you've set a target for reducing your carbon emissions by 20%, but your organisation has said, well, we want to increase student numbers by 50% over that time period, and that's, they've just decided this, then it might be worth you going back and talking to them and say, well, look, can we reframe the carbon reduction target as a per student metric and see if we can work on that, because we're going to struggle to get absolute emissions down, but we might be able to start working on relative emissions. So it's really about giving you more data and armory to go and talk to senior management about how you're doing and what you might be doing in the future. The influence of the grid factor is one of the things that's fairly easy to calculate a number for. So, for example, if you're going between 2014 and 2015, in terms of the year of emission factors, if you're going to get a 7% decrease. If you're going between 2013 to 2014, you're going to get an 11% increase in terms of your electricity usage. So basically what this does is it pushes up or pushes down your emissions from grid electricity. It does depend on the set you're kind of working off. So if you're aligned academically to the 2015 factors, you've done okay this year out of it. If you're aligned from a financial tax year on the 2014 factors, this year you got a bit stuffed. But everybody did. So it's kind of universal, really. The last question in this set is looking at 3G, which is the decrease in emissions from other sources in the year ahead. This is the same question as the previous one, but instead of asking about what happened between 13-14 and 14-15, it's asking you to predict what your footprint will be in 2015-16, excluding the impact of your projects. So it's saying, taking out the projects from this, what do you think what would 2015-16 be if you didn't have those projects reducing it? And again, this sounds like a tricky question, but it's really the RES tool, the CSP Our Tool, will help you do this, because that's exactly what it does. It says, you know, if there's going to be changes next year, you can put those changes into different bits of the estate, and it will say, right, this is what we think your footprint will be. It looks at future changes, what emissions and building sources are due to change in the next year. It looks at emission factors and what emission factors are changing significantly in the next year. If you are aligned, if you are on the 2015 factors, so you're using the academic factors, bear in mind that one thing you don't have is any foresight on the emission factors, because you're using the most up-to-date factors, and therefore you won't know what the 2016 factors are until they come out in June next year. If you're working on a financial year basis, then you'll be aligned to the 2014 factors, and what you will get is a bit of foresight, so you can see, right, okay, I can actually see the next year's factors already and say, right, okay, that's going to be the impact of them. The RES tool, the CSP Our Tool, spits out graphs for you, and so you can look at, for example, your 2014 and 2014-15 footprint versus your 2015-16 footprint. This one here is predicting that you're going to go up very slightly. So what you can do is go in and sort of find out what it is that's causing you to do that, and you can put those changes into this question. You don't need to do forecasting using the Resource Efficient Scotland tool. You can do it in other ways as well, but the reason why these questions are being asked is both for organisations to make sure that you can document the things that are causing you to miss your targets or exceed your targets, and also so you can start understanding why you need to be able to forecast and why you need to be able to accurately understand what's causing the changes to your footprint in the future. Right, do we have any questions? Oh, got questions.
Okay,
yay.
So we have one question here. So we have an increase in student residence occupation from, for 2015 to 16, from 87.5 to 100%. Does this go in 3G? Do you want me to repeat the question?
Yes, it does go in 3G. That's exactly, yes, because what's happening is that in 2014-15 it was the 87%, and then in 2015-16 it's gone up. So you kind of, you know, you've got a bit of foresight on it already, but that is going to impact in when you do your 2015-16 footprint, you are going to see the impact of that. So yes, it goes in question 3G. Perfect.
Okay, another question. Weather is one of the biggest external influences on emissions. Would we be expected to quantify the effects of, e.g., a harsh winter in this section by doing degree day analysis?
You can certainly do a degree day analysis and say we think that, for example, you know, and I would put it as I think it was an other, and say our heating, you know, the harsh or the harsher winter has caused our heating to go up by, or emissions to go up by X amount. Yes, so you can put it in there. Some organisations are sensitive to degree days and weather changes. Some are less so. So it will be organisation dependent. But if you feel that it's one of the things that's really driving your footprint year on year, then yes, that should go in. However, you can only really do that properly for question 3. Sorry, I'm going to go back, make sure I get the right question. So for question 3G, is that, yes, so sorry, the previous question, did you say it was question, I think I've got the question numbers wrong in here. So I'm just going to check. Okay, 3G here should be 3H. So I think the answer to the previous question, which was about the accommodation block, yeah, I think that should go in 3H because it's in the year ahead. Okay. The question about the degree days, because you can only really see the weather degree days accurately for the previous year, you can do it for there. For the future year, you obviously can't predict what the weather's going to be. You know what it's going to be for half of it because you're halfway through it, but you're not going to be able to get the degree days accurately for the future year.
Great. We have a couple of other questions. So back to residences. The residences became wholly owned in 2014. Before then, they still supplied them with utilities. Is that a change of boundary or one for question 3G or 3H?
I'm thinking about this. Before 2014, were they in your boundary before 2014, or were they, because they were owned by someone else, did you not include the emissions from them?
Just waiting for a typed-in response. I think before 2014 we excluded them. They certainly did under EMR.
I think it's essentially an increase to your boundary, but I think that I don't think you want to go back and put it into your baseline. It's a bit like it's almost like you've bought another company. I'm trying to think how it would work from an industrial point of view, and it's like a bit like you've bought another company. So you basically kind of, that's being included into, yeah, that's now appeared in your boundary. So I think it does, I think it should go into, you should probably put that into question 3A and just note that at this point in time, your footprint has increased because of that. And you might also want to document it in 3G. I think it can go into 3G as well. You can say, you know, at this point in time, it's our footprint, it's an estate change. It's basically where, you know, if you were building it from scratch, then it would be like we have built a new building and that's causing our estate to change. So yes, you have to include, it's going to be included in your footprint. So it's going to come into 3A. So you'll be able to see it there, but it's also something that's driving your footprint increase in 3G. If that hasn't answered your question properly, do feel free to email myself or Rebecca and Jennifer at SSN, and we'll try and kind of drill down a bit further into what should be done. But I think it basically can go into both. It's an increase to your boundary, but it's not a kind of, it's something that's driving your emissions outwards.
Great, okay. And we've got another question. It's a two-part question, so you may want to address them together or separately. So is there any best practice advice under required reporting if resetting baseline? Also, maybe considerable future estate changes with one service merging with an external organisation and details are still emerging. How can we factor this in?
In terms of the first part of that question, if there's any best practice advice, our advice really at the moment is you need to, as an organisation, decide what your strategy is. And so if what you're finding is that you're stuck with an old baseline that is meaningless to you, you can't, it's kind of lost in the impenetrable mists of time, you can't see the data any longer, and it's like a lead weight and it's holding you back, get rid of it. It's kind of like there's no point. It's like we don't want people to be spending 50% of their energy tracking down old historic data that is, those years have gone. The ship has sailed. We can't do anything about them. So get rid of them. But if you think that your old baseline is helpful because it helps tell a story and you've actually got a very coherent data set and it's very useful to you, then hold on to it. So it's the best practice is really, it's kind of like have a strategy as an organisation and be confident about the strategy. If you're going to ditch a baseline and update it, so rebaseline to a more recent year, make sure that it's documented why you did that and explain to people that it's, and it's not, it's not a sin to rebaseline. It's not, not trying to sweep things under the carpet, but, we're working with big complex organisations and sometimes they change so much that they don't look like, they look completely different. And the other thing is that if you ran a target, a lot of people are now, if they set targets in 2009, they're kind of at the end of that target period. So those targets probably, kind of matured in 2014. Once your target is matured, then, you should actually rebaseline. It's not only kind of, it's not only a nice thing to do, it's also a good thing to do because, really, you should every 5 years look at your boundary and say, right, okay, is there anything else that we can include in this boundary now? Have we got better data around certain things? Can we be more accurate about it? And, doing that stops you being wedded to this kind of like, picture of your organisation that doesn't really reflect what you are any longer. So be confident about saying, if this is the right thing for us to do, let's do it, and let's do it properly. But, if you feel that you spend a lot of time talking about a data set that wasn't yours, that you never owned, that causes you all sorts of bother, and that time could be better spent implementing carbon reduction projects, let's face it, we're trying to, we're tackling climate change. It doesn't matter, the historical data set is we should only keep it going if it's useful to us. If it's not useful to you, let it go, would be our advice. Part two of the question, obviously I can't remember what that was now.
So it's all about future estate changes are due and how can that be factored in? Oh, okay. Future estate changes. It's straightforward if you're talking about your organisation stays as it is and you're going to build a new building. If you're doing that, that's fairly straightforward. For example, in the carbon footprint and project register tool, you put in the building, you say it's not an existing building, it's a future building. You tell the date that it's going to be opened, you give it some approximated emissions in terms of electricity, gas and water, and it adds it into your footprint at the appropriate year. But that's a very different thing from saying, at some point in the future, me and another organisation are going to merge. That is quite hard to deal with, and I don't think I've ever dealt with that. I think the only thing you can do is actually say, well, if we know that this is likely to happen, let's not set a long-term target, let's set an annual target, and let's concentrate, probably really hard on getting really good data. Talk to the other organisation and say, look, let's both talk about where a good point in time is to kind of, to align our data sets. Let's talk about how well we can align those and almost sort of preempt some of the problems that are going to occur. But, until that happens, you can't do very much about it. So maybe what you just need to do is say, well, at the moment, this is a future thing that could happen to us or will happen to us. But at the moment, we've just got an annual reduction target that we're going to try and meet. And we're going to get our data really, beautifully in order so that we can merge seamlessly. That's the only, I don't see what else you can really do.
Does that help? I'm having a reasonably good guess, I think, from where that might be coming.
Okay, I've got one other question maybe in the meantime. We've not started to carbon cost our projects yet. Can we just list them this year and put carbon to them next year?
Yes. On the basis that we'd rather get an incomplete return than no return at all. So yes, I think the key thing about that is just making it clear in the notes that this is a work in progress, and that these numbers you'll be getting these numbers for next year, and that part of your objectives around maybe around governance are to make sure that your project list is really well carbon costed and maintained and managed. So yeah, I think that's absolutely fine. If you need help with specific projects, for example, you want to do a couple, for example, or you've got a couple of projects that you really know have kind of done really good savings for you, then do get in touch with the SSN team, or Resource Efficient Scotland will possibly be able to help with that as well. At least point you in the right direction for things that would help you get going.
Great. The previous person is happy with that answer, so thank you. And we have another question. When will the EAUC carbon costing tool be available? And I'm afraid I do not know the answer to that one, and I don't think Claire does either. So I'll get back to you on that one. And obviously, as soon as it's available, we'll be circulating it around all our networks. Are there any more questions? Okay, that seems to be it.
So I think that's us. I've done all these slides. I'll go back to the end one. Do you want to pass back to Jennifer to round up?
Jennifer, do you want to say anything?
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Rebecca. I think that's been excellent for us here. And as I said before, if anybody has any questions, please email them through to myself or Rebecca Beavers, and we will do our best to help. But I think that's been really useful for everyone. Thanks again, Claire. Thanks again, Rebecca.
Great, so thank you very much for tuning in today. Thank you to Claire and Jennifer for their input. I will email everybody a link to the podcast of the webinar tomorrow, along with a link to some of the slides, or all the slides, so you can refer to them all at a later date and share with any relevant colleagues. Thank you very much for joining us today. If you have any more questions, please email any of the team and we'll make sure your questions are passed in the right direction. Thank you.